The millionaire is shocked when a virgin black beggar agrees to be his wife for 7 days. Sarah Jenkins was done, bone-tired, soul-weary, the kind of exhausted that seeps into your very marrow. Another 12-hour shift at St. Jude's, another mountain of bills piling up on the kitchen table, another heartbreaking decline in her mama's memory. Alzheimer's was a thief, plain and simple, stealing Margaret piece by painful piece. She slumped into a booth at the daily grind, the rain drumming against the window like a relentless heartbeat. A coffee, black and strong, was all that stood between her and a complete meltdown. Suddenly, a sleek, black limo, the kind you only see in movies, pulled up right outside. The door swung open, and out stepped him. Richard Davenport. The name alone dripped with money and power. He was all sharp angles and icy blue eyes. The suit that probably cost more than her rent for a year. What in the world was he doing here? He walked straight towards her, like a heat-seeking missile. "Miss Jenkins?" he asked, his voice smooth as silk, but with an undercurrent that made the hairs on her arms stand up. Then came the offer. Outlandish, insane. He needed a wife, a temporary wife, for 7 days. His grandma, the family matriarch, was fading fast, and all she wanted was to see him settled. And he was willing to pay a king's ransom. Enough to save her house, enough to give Margaret the best care possible. Sarah felt a dizzying mix of disbelief and hope. This had to be some kind of cruel joke. She was a nurse, a caregiver, not some actress, but the desperation clawing at her insides was a powerful motivator. He saw the turmoil on her face, the battle raging behind her eyes. He named a sum, a ridiculous, life-altering sum, and she, against every fiber of her being, agreed to meet him at his penthouse. His place was a monument to obscene wealth, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan, art that probably belonged in a museum, furniture so pristine you were afraid to touch it. He handed her a contract, thick and intimidating, pages of legal jargon, promises of confidentiality, and a clause that made her stomach churn. In the event of unforeseen circumstances, including, but not limited to, disclosure of personal information, a penalty fee will be applied. What did that even mean? Before she could ask, his phone rang. His face hardened, his eyes turning glacial. "I understand," he said, his voice clipped and dangerous. "Take care of it. No loose ends." He hung up. And that gaze, that intense gaze, locked onto hers. A faint, chilling smile played on his lips. "It seems," he purred, "that our arrangement just became a lot more complicated." "Ei, antes de continuarmos com essa história incrível, preciso te fazer um alerta importante. Muitos inscritos têm relatado que o YouTube removeu suas inscrições sem aviso. Dá só uma conferida rápida no botão vermelho aí embaixo, para garantir que você ainda está inscrito no canal. Não quero que você perca nenhum conteúdo exclusivo que vem por aí. E já que você está aí, deixa aquele like poderoso que me ajuda muito com o algoritmo. Ah, e me conta, nos comentários, de qual cidade você está assistindo. Adoro conhecer cada pessoa incrível que faz parte dessa comunidade. Sua participação faz toda a diferença. Vamos interagir. It seems, he purred, that our arrangement just became a lot more complicated. Sarah's breath hitched. Complicated? It was already insane. What else could possibly go wrong? What does that mean? She stammered, trying to keep her voice steady. Richard didn't answer right away. He walked over to the window, his back to her, the city lights painting him in a cold, distant glow. "Let's just say," he said finally, turning back, a predatory glint in his eyes, "that some people don't want me to get married at all." He moved closer, too close, and Sarah instinctively backed away. "What kind of people?" she asked, her heart pounding in her chest. Was this about money, power struggles, something way bigger than she could even imagine? "People with vested interests," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "People who will do anything to protect what they believe is theirs." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. This wasn't just about a sick grandma anymore. This was dangerous. This was real. Suddenly, the lights flickered, then went out. The penthouse plunged into darkness, save for the faint glow of the city below. Sarah gasped, reaching out blindly. "Richard?" she whispered, fear coiling in her stomach like a snake. Silence. Then a crash, a loud, shattering crash from the other side of the room. Sarah screamed, scrambling back against the wall, her hands flying to her mouth. A gunshot. The sound ripped through the silence, deafening, terrifying. Sarah squeezed her eyes shut, her whole body trembling. More silence. Then a voice, a woman's voice, cold and hard, cutting through the darkness like a razor. "Richard?" the voice said. "Where are you, darling?" Sarah's blood ran cold. That voice, it sounded familiar. Way too familiar. A match flared. A tiny, flickering flame in the darkness, illuminating a face Sarah knew. A face that made her stomach churn and her world tilt on its axis. It was Margaret, her mama. But this wasn't the Margaret she knew. This wasn't the sweet, confused woman she cared for every day. This Margaret's eyes were sharp, cold, calculating. A gun was clutched in her hand, still smoking. "Mama?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. What's going on?" Margaret smiled, a cruel, twisted smile that Sarah had never seen before. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice dripping with a venom Sarah never knew existed. "You have no idea." She took a step forward, the matchlight dancing across her face. "Richard Davenport," she purred, her gaze fixed on something behind Sarah. "You won't be needing a wife after all." And then she raised the gun again, pointing it directly at someone behind Sarah. Someone Sarah couldn't see, because she was frozen in absolute, utter horror. "Richard Davenport," she purred, her gaze fixed on something behind Sarah. "You won't be needing a wife after all." And then she raised the gun again, pointing it directly at someone behind Sarah. Someone behind Sarah. Someone Sarah couldn't see, because she was frozen in absolute, utter horror. Then he spoke. "Margaret, what in God's name?" It was Richard, but it wasn't Richard. It was Mama's Richard. The Richard she'd talked about for years, the one she'd lost to the war, the one she'd mourned every single day since. But he was standing right there, behind her, looking older, harder, but unmistakably him. Sarah's head swam. Two Richards? What the actual? Margaret's face crumpled. Richard? My Richard? You're alive? The gun wavered in her hand. Alive and well, Margaret, he said softly, stepping into the light. Though I can't say the same for your sanity. The other Richard, her Richard, the millionaire, was nowhere to be seen. Vanished. Like he'd never been there at all. But the Alzheimer's, Sarah stammered, her voice cracking. Forgetting. Margaret's eyes flickered, a cunning glint replacing the confusion. Oh, honey, she said, a wicked smile spreading across her face. That was just for show. A little acting. You wouldn't believe how easy it is to fool people when they think you're losing your mind. Sarah felt like she'd been sucker punched. Her own mother. Lying? Manipulating her? For what? But why? She whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. Why all of this? The real Richard stepped forward, placing a hand on Margaret's arm. It's a long story, Sarah, he said, his voice filled with a weariness that aged him decades. One that involves secrets, lies, and a whole lot of money. Money that he stole from us. Margaret spat, her eyes blazing with fury. That imposter who took your name, Richard, who lived your life. Sarah's mind raced. Imposter? Was the Richard Davenport she'd met not really Richard Davenport? Had she been played? Suddenly, a voice boomed from the doorway. Well, well, well. Looks like the family reunion is in full swing. Standing there, silhouetted against the dim hallway light, was him, Richard Davenport, the millionaire. But there was something different about him. A swagger, a confidence, and in his hand he held a gun. Took you long enough, brother, he said, a cruel smile twisting his lips. Brother? Sarah gasped. Two Richards. A fake Margaret. And now a brother? This wasn't just complicated. It was a full-blown family war. And she was right in the middle of it. The real Richard looked at the imposter, his face a mask of sorrow. It didn't have to come to this, Ethan, he said, his voice heavy with regret. Ethan? So his name was Ethan? Oh, but it did, brother dear, Ethan sneered. You always got everything. The girl, the money, the life. It's time I evened the score. He raised the gun, pointing it directly at his brother. Say goodbye, Richard. Sarah screamed. But it was too late. Sarah screamed, but it was too late. Bang! But the bullet hadn't hit Richard. Ethan stood there, stunned, his eyes wide with disbelief. A small, crimson stain bloomed on his own chest. He looked down, confused, then back at Margaret. Mom? He gasped, his voice barely a whisper. Margaret's face was a mask of fury and something else. Regret? Disgust? Before anyone could react, she dropped the smoking gun and lunged at Ethan, catching him as he crumpled to the floor. Ethan, my baby, what have I done? She wailed, rocking him in her arms. The cold, calculating mask was gone, replaced by raw, agonizing grief. The real Richard stared down at his brother, his face a mixture of shock and sorrow. Margaret, why? Margaret looked up, her eyes filled with a pain that seemed to reach to the very depths of her soul. He was going to kill you, Richard. I couldn't let him. Not again. Again? Sarah whispered, her head spinning. Then, the bombshell. Margaret looked at Sarah, her eyes suddenly clear, focused. Sarah, honey, she said, her voice surprisingly strong. "There's something you need to know. Something I've kept hidden for far too long." She took a shaky breath and looked back down at Ethan, still clinging to life. "Ethan isn't Richard's brother. He's his son." A wave of nausea washed over Sarah. Son? Ethan was Richard's son? But how? Richard stared at Margaret, his face ashen. "What are you saying, Margaret? That's impossible." Margaret shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "It's true, Richard. Years ago, before you went to war, before you left me, I had a moment of weakness. With your best friend, David. Ethan is David's son, but I raised him as my own. I never told you because I was ashamed, and because I loved you so much, I couldn't bear to lose you." The air crackled with disbelief. Richard, the man she fought, she knew, had a son he didn't know about. And that son, his half-brother in a twisted way, had just tried to kill him. Ethan coughed, blood trickling from his lips. He looked up at Richard, his eyes filled with a strange mix of anger and yearning. "Is it true?" he croaked. "Am I your son?" Richard looked down at Ethan, his face etched with pain. He knelt beside him, reaching out a hesitant hand. "I don't know what to say," he stammered. "But if what Margaret says is true, then yes, I guess I am your father." Ethan managed a weak, bitter smile. "Figures," he whispered. "Always getting your leftovers." Even in life, even in death. And then, with a final shuddering breath, Ethan was gone. Margaret screamed, a primal, heartbreaking sound that echoed through the penthouse. Sarah stood there, frozen, her mind reeling. Everything she thought she knew was a lie, a carefully constructed web of deceit, secrets, and shocking revelations. Who was Richard Davenport really? Who was Margaret? And what was Sarah's place in this insane family drama? The real Richard stepped forward, his face grim. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice tight. "Now." But before they could move, the elevator doors pinged open, and standing there, framed in the doorway, was a figure Sarah hadn't seen since she first walked into the daily grind. Richard Davenport, the millionaire. And he wasn't alone. Behind him stood a phalanx of men in dark suits, their faces grim and unreadable. The real Richard stiffened, his eyes narrowed. "Well, well," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "Looks like the party's just getting started." Millionaire Richard smiled, a chillingly familiar smile. "Indeed," he purred, "and I wouldn't miss it for the world." He looked directly at Sarah, his eyes glinting with something she couldn't quite decipher. "Come along, darling," he said, extending his hand. "It's time you learn the truth about who you really are." Millionaire Richard smiled, a chillingly familiar smile. "Indeed," he purred, "and I wouldn't miss it for the world." He looked directly at Sarah, his eyes glinting with something she couldn't quite decipher. "Come along, darling," he said, extending his hand. "It's time you learned the truth about who you really are." Sarah's mind was a scrambled mess. Who was she? Just a nurse, caught in a rich people's drama? Or something more? She looked at the real Richard, his face etched with worry. Then back at the millionaire, Ethan's killer, her. What? He was offering her his hand, a way out. But At what cost? She hesitated. The real Richard made the decision for her. He shoved her behind him, stepping forward, his jaw tight. Leave her out of this, Ethan. This is between us. Ethan, or was he really Richard, just chuckled. Always the protector, aren't you, Dad? But this concerns her more than you think. Much, much more. Suddenly, one of the suits stepped forward, shoving a tablet into Ethan's hand. He glanced at it, his smile widening into a predatory grin. Ah, yes, here's the proof, he said, holding the tablet out for everyone to see. Let's just say, Sarah darling, that you're not quite who you think you are. On the screen, a picture, a grainy old photo. A woman Sarah vaguely recognized. Wait, it couldn't be. It was her, or rather, a younger version of her, standing next to Richard Davenport. The real Richard Davenport, looking much younger, but undeniably him. And they were holding a baby. What is this? Sarah stammered, her voice trembling. Ethan chuckled. That, my dear, is you. Or rather, that's your adoption photo. You see, darling, Margaret wasn't just protecting Richard. She was protecting you. Everything swam. Adoption? Margaret wasn't her real mom? But the love, the years of care, it was all a lie? No, that's impossible, she whispered, shaking her head. My mama would never. But even as she said it, she knew. She saw it in Margaret's eyes. The guilt, the pain, the fierce protectiveness that went beyond a normal mother-daughter bond. Ethan continued, his voice dripping with venom. You see, darling, Richard here, he was quite the player back in the day. He had a brief affair with a woman who gave birth to you, a woman who couldn't keep you. So Margaret, being the ever-so-helpful housekeeper, stepped in, adopted you, and raised you as her own. He paused, letting the words sink in. But here's the kicker, Sarah. That woman, your real mother? She was my mother too. The air crackled with a silence so thick you could choke on it. Sarah stared at Ethan, then at Richard, then back at the photo. It was too much. Too fast. You're saying we're siblings? She finally managed to choke out. Ethan smiled, a cold, empty smile. Half-siblings, darling, but yes, you and I, we're family. And Richard, well, he's your father. A scream built in Sarah's chest, threatening to erupt. Her world had just shattered. Her mom wasn't her mom. She was adopted, and the man she was briefly married to, the man standing before her, was her father. And the man who tried to kill him, her brother. She stumbled backward, her hand flying to her mouth. It was all too much, too insane. She couldn't breathe. Suddenly, a hand grabbed her arm, a strong, steady hand. She looked up, dazed, and saw the real Richard, his eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and something else. Understanding? Sarah, he said softly, his voice barely a whisper. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. He pulled her closer, shielding her from Ethan's gaze. Come on, he said, leading her towards the elevator. Let's get you out of here. We'll figure this out, together. But as they reached the elevator, Ethan's voice stopped them cold. Going somewhere, sister? He called out, his voice laced with menace. Sarah froze, her blood running cold. She knew deep down that this wasn't over, not by a long shot. This was just the beginning of something even more twisted, more dangerous than she could ever have imagined. and she had a feeling, a terrible sinking feeling, that she was about to lose everything, including herself. Ethan raised his gun again, pointing it directly at Sarah. "Sorry, sis," he said, his finger tightening on the trigger. "But some family secrets are best left buried." Ethan raised his gun again, pointing it directly at Sarah. "Sorry, sis," he said, his finger tightening on the trigger. "But some family secrets are best left buried." Bang! Sarah flinched, bracing for the impact, but it never came. Instead, a guttural cry tore through the air. She opened her eyes to see Ethan staggering, his face contorted in disbelief. Not from a wound inflicted on him, but because it was Richard, the real Richard, the father she never knew, who stood between them, a small, pearl-handled derringer smoking in his hand. I won't let you hurt her," he rasped, his voice thick with emotion. Ethan crumpled, but before he hit the ground, he spat out one last venomous word: coward. Silence, the kind that screams louder than any gunshot. Margaret wailed, a broken animal sound, but Sarah couldn't focus on her. Her eyes were glued to Richard, the man who had just killed his own son to save her. Her, a complete stranger just hours ago. "Why?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Why would you do that?" He looked at her, his eyes filled with a pain that mirrored her own. "Because," he said, his voice trembling, "you're my daughter, and I failed you once. I won't fail you again." He took a step towards her, but then everything changed. The elevator doors shuddered open again, but it wasn't more goons or family secrets waiting this time. It was a man, an older man, dressed in a simple, worn suit. His face was lined and weathered, his eyes familiar. He stepped out, his gaze sweeping over the scene of carnage. He took it all in: the dead body, the grieving mother, the blood, the shock. Then his eyes landed on Sarah, and he smiled. "Hello, Sarah," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "It's good to finally meet you." Sarah stared at him, a cold dread creeping up her spine. She didn't know him, not consciously, but something about him. "Who are you?" she managed to croak out. The man chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "That's a long story," he said, his eyes twinkling with a dark amusement. "But let's just say I'm the reason you're here. I'm the reason all of this happened." He paused, letting his words hang in the air. "You see, Sarah, Richard isn't your father, and Margaret isn't your anything. You are just the pawn in my game. You were destined to die here, and I wanted to watch. You see, I am your creator. It is I. I am God." Sarah's world tilted on its axis. God? Standing in front of her? It was insane. Impossible. But the conviction in his voice, the way he held himself, it was terrifyingly believable. She looked at Richard, desperately seeking some sign of disbelief, of sanity. But his face was blank, his eyes wide with a dawning horror. "David," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Is that really you?" "In the flesh, the man, David, God," replied, his smile widening. "Or what's left of it. You see, Richard, I've been watching you live the life I should have had, watching you raise the daughter that was meant to be mine." He took a step towards Sarah, his eyes burning into hers. "You see, Sarah," he said, his voice soft, almost caressing. "You're not just Richard's daughter. You're something much more. You're the key to everything." And then the elevator doors slammed shut. The lights flickered, plunging the penthouse into darkness. And Sarah knew, with a chilling certainty, that whatever game was being played, it had just entered a whole new level of madness. That it was not God. It was the devil, and it was ready for its next move. Ethan raised his gun again, pointing it directly at Sarah. "Sorry, sis," he said, his finger tightening on the trigger. "But some family secrets are best left buried." Bang! Sarah flinched, bracing for the impact. But it never came. Instead, a guttural cry tore through the air. She opened her eyes to see Ethan staggering, his face contorted in disbelief, not from a wound inflicted on him, but because it was Richard, the real Richard, the father she never knew, who stood between them, a small, pearl-handled derringer smoking in his hand. I won't let you hurt her," he rasped, his voice thick with emotion. Ethan crumpled, but before he hit the ground, he spat out one last, venomous word. "Coward." Silence, the kind that screams louder than any gunshot. Margaret wailed a broken animal sound, but Sarah couldn't focus on her. Her eyes were glued to Richard, the man who had just killed his own son to save her. Her, a complete stranger, just hours ago. "Why?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Why would you do that?" He looked at her, his eyes filled with a pain that mirrored her own. "Because," he said, his voice trembling, "you're my daughter, and I failed you once. I won't fail you again." He took a step towards her, but then everything changed. The elevator doors shuddered open again. But it wasn't more goons or family secrets waiting this time. It was a man, an older man dressed in a simple, worn suit. His face was lined and weathered, his eyes familiar. He stepped out, his gaze sweeping over the scene of carnage. He took it all in, the dead body, the grieving mother, the blood, the shock. Then his eyes landed on Sarah, and he smiled. "Hello, Sarah," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "It's good to finally meet you." Sarah stared at him, a cold dread creeping up her spine. She didn't know him, not consciously, but something about him. "Who are you?" she managed to croak out. The man chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "That's a long story," he said, his eyes twinkling with a dark amusement. "But let's just say, I'm the reason you're here. I'm the reason all of this happened." He paused, letting his words hang in the air. "You see, Sarah, Richard isn't your father, and Margaret isn't your anything. You are just the pawn in my game. You were destined to die here, and I wanted to watch. You see, I am your creator. It is I. I am God." Sarah's world tilted on its axis. God standing in front of her? It was insane, impossible. But the conviction in his voice, the way he held himself, it was terrifyingly believable. She looked at Richard, desperately seeking some sign of disbelief, of sanity. But his face was blank, his eyes wide with a dawning horror. "David?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Is that really you? In the flesh. The man, David, God, replied, his smile widening. Or what's left of it. You see, Richard, I've been watching you. Watching you live the life I should have had. Watching you raise the daughter that was meant to be mine. He took a step towards Sarah, his eyes burning into hers. You see, Sarah, he said, his voice soft, almost caressing. You're not just Richard's daughter. You're something much more. You're the key to everything. And then the elevator doors slammed shut. The lights flickered, plunging the penthouse into darkness. And Sarah knew, with a chilling certainty, that whatever game was being played, it had just entered a whole new level of madness. That it was not God, it was the devil, and it was ready for its next move. Then a voice, smooth as honey, cut through the darkness. Wrong, David. A figure emerged from the shadows. Not one of Ethan's goons, not another long-lost relative. It was Ethan, but impossibly standing. He brushed off his suit, a wry smile playing on his lips. Always the dramatic entrance, eh, Dad? He said, spitting the word like venom. Sarah's breath hitched. Dad? David? God whirled around, his face a mask of disbelief. But I saw you fall. I saw Richard. Ethan laughed, a cold, hollow sound. Oh, I fell all right. But you forget, Dad. I've been playing this game a lot longer than you have. I know all the tricks. He reached inside his jacket, pulling out a metal shield, a small, ornate shield emblazoned with a strange symbol. He held it up, deflecting the light. Didn't think I'd come unprepared, did you? He said, his eyes glinting in the darkness. I've been preparing for this my whole life. Your key isn't what you think it is. Sarah stared, her mind a whirlwind of confusion. What was happening? How was Ethan alive? And who was this dad he was talking about? David, God, lunged forward, his face contorted with rage. You can't stop me, Ethan. It is my destiny. Sarah is the only hope for my life, and she will serve her purpose. Ethan sidestepped him easily, his movements fluid and unnervingly graceful. Hope? For you? You gave that up a long time ago, Father. He raised the shield, the symbol glowing faintly. It's time for you to face the music, Daddy dearest. And then the impossible happened. Ethan's shield emitted a blinding light, engulfing David. A scream, a terrible, unearthly scream echoed through the penthouse. And when the light faded, David was gone, vanished, like he'd never been there at all. The penthouse was silent. Only the faint hum of the city outside broke the tension. Sarah stared at Ethan, her mouth agape. He had killed God? Her head spun. None of this made any sense. Ethan turned to her, his face strangely calm. Sorry about all that, he said, his voice almost apologetic. Things got a little out of hand. What? What just happened? Sarah stammered, her voice barely a whisper. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. It's a long story, he said, and you wouldn't believe me if I told you. Just know this, Sarah, that so-called God was my father, and also not who you think I am. I am not dead or dying, and all you need to know is that you're safe now, at least for now. He looked at her, his eyes searching. Come on, he said, offering his hand. Let's get you out of here. You've had enough. Craziness for one night. Sarah hesitated. Could she trust him? He had tried to kill her just moments ago, but he had also just saved her from God? She looked at Richard, still reeling from everything that had happened. He seemed just as lost and confused as she was. Ethan smiled, a genuine, almost boyish smile. "Trust me, Sarah," he said. "I know this is a lot to take in, but I promise I'll explain everything. Just come with me." And then, as if on cue, the phone rang. Ethan pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and his face hardened. "Speak of the devil," he muttered. "It's for you." He held out the phone. Sarah reached for it, her hand trembling. She put it to her ear. "Hello?" she said, her voice barely a whisper. A voice, cold and familiar, answered. "Sarah," it said, "I know everything." And then the line went dead. Sarah stared at the phone, her heart pounding in her chest. Who was that? And what did they know? Ethan watched her, his eyes filled with a knowing dread. "Trouble?" he asked. Sarah nodded, her voice shaking. They said they know everything." Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Looks like our little vacation is over," he said. "Time to pack our bags, Sarah. Things are about to get a whole lot worse." He then stared at a photo, which was an old Polaroid of the hospital. "They will pay what they have done," he whispered. Sarah stared at the phone, her heart pounding in her chest. Who was that, and what did they know? Ethan watched her, his eyes filled with a knowing dread. "Trouble?" he asked. Sarah nodded, her voice shaking. They said they know everything." Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Looks like our little vacation is over," he said. "Time to pack our bags, Sarah. Things are about to get a whole lot worse." He then stared at a photo, which was an old Polaroid of the hospital. "They will pay what they have done," he whispered. He grabbed her hand, pulling her towards the elevator. "Come on, we need to get you somewhere safe." Richard looked lost, utterly bewildered. "What about me? What am I supposed to do?" Ethan glanced back, his expression softening slightly. "Stay put, Dad. Let me handle this." "Dad?" The word hung in the air, thick with unspoken emotions. Sarah barely registered it. Her mind was racing, trying to piece together the fragments of truth, the lies, the betrayals. The elevator doors opened. As they stepped inside, Sarah glanced back. Margaret stood there, rocking back and forth, a broken doll in a sea of shattered dreams. Richard stood beside her, his face a mask of grief and confusion. It was like a movie scene, and she was leaving them behind. The doors slid shut. As they descended, Ethan pulled her close. "Don't worry," he murmured, his voice low and reassuring. "I won't let anything happen to you." But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into a trap, that whatever was coming, it was bigger, darker, more terrifying than anything she could imagine. The elevator doors opened on the lobby. As they walked out, a figure stepped into their path. A woman, elegant, sophisticated, with a steely glint in her eyes. Sarah gasped. She knew that face. She'd seen it before. On the news, in magazines, plastered across billboards. It was Eleanor Vance, the CEO of Vance Industries, one of the most powerful women in the world. And she was looking directly at Sarah, a cold, assessing gaze. "Sarah Jenkins," she said, her voice smooth as ice. "It's so nice to finally meet you." Ethan stiffened beside her. "Eleanor," he said, his voice tight. "What are you doing here?" Eleanor ignored him, her eyes fixed on Sarah. "I've been waiting a long time for this," she said, a faint smile playing on her lips. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. The lies, the secrets, the manipulations. It all led back to this woman. But why? What did Eleanor Vance want with her? "Who are you?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. Eleanor Vance stepped closer, her eyes glittering with a strange intensity. "Oh, darling," she said, her voice almost a purr. "I'm your mother." The world went black. Eleanor Vance stepped closer, her eyes glittering with a strange intensity. "Oh, darling," she said, her voice almost a purr. "I'm your mother." The world went black. Then a blurry image swam into focus. Not the sterile white of a hospital room, but a private jet. She was strapped into a plush seat, Eleanor Vance's icy face hovering above her. "Welcome back, sweetheart," Eleanor said, her smile unsettlingly wide. "It's time you knew the truth." Truth? What more could there be? Adoptions, secret siblings, fake fathers, God himself? Sarah's brain was fried. "Ethan?" she croaked, looking around. He was there, lounging in a nearby seat, a glass of something amber swirling in his hand. He caught her eye, a flicker of apology crossing his face. "Sorry, sis," he said, taking a breath. "Sip. Had to be done." Had to be done? What did that mean? Eleanor snapped her fingers, and a video started playing on a screen in front of Sarah. It was her, a younger version, maybe 5 or 6 years old, playing in a garden. A beautiful garden, filled with exotic flowers and towering trees. Then, another figure entered the frame. A man, tall, handsome, with kind eyes and a warm smile. He knelt down, scooped her up in his arms, and spun her around. "Daddy!" the little girl in the video squealed. Sarah's breath hitched. "Daddy? Who was that?" It wasn't Richard. It wasn't David. It wasn't anyone she recognized. The man in the video turned to the camera, his smile fading. "Hello," he said, his voice clear and strong. "If you're watching this, it means something has gone terribly wrong." He paused, taking a deep breath. "My name is Charles Ashton, and Sarah isn't just my daughter. She's the key to everything, to saving the world." Saving the world? What in God's name? Then a title flashed on the screen. Project Aurora. Eleanor turned off the video, her eyes gleaming. "Charles Ashton," she said, her voice laced with contempt. "A fool, a dreamer. He thought he could save the world with his little experiment." "Experiment?" Sarah whispered, fear coiling in her stomach. Eleanor leaned in close, her voice a low hiss. "You, darling, are the experiment. Project Aurora. Charles thought he could breed the perfect human, genetically engineered for something. I never really understood the details. Something about harnessing psychic energy. Blah, blah, blah." She straightened up, her smile returning. But Charles was a liability. He was getting too close to the truth. So, I had him taken care of. Taken care of? Meaning killed? Sarah stared at Eleanor, her mind reeling. This woman, her mother, had killed her father, and she was genetically engineered? But why me? Sarah stammered. Why tell me all? This now? Eleanor shrugged. Charles hid the key, the real key to Project Aurora. He encoded it in your DNA. And now, after all these years, I finally need it. And you, darling, are going to give it to me. She snapped her fingers again, and a needle appeared in a gloved hand. Sarah recoiled. "What are you going to do to me?" she cried. Eleanor smiled, a cruel, twisted smile. "I'm going to unlock your potential, darling. And then, we're going to change the world." Suddenly, the jet lurched violently. "What was that?" Eleanor snapped, her eyes flashing with anger. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "We're under attack, ma'am. Someone is trying to shoot us down." Attack? Who was attacking them? Ethan's eyes widened. "This wasn't part of the plan," he muttered. Eleanor's face contorted with rage. "Find out who's doing this!" she screamed. But before anyone could react, the jet was hit again. This time the impact was deafening. The cabin lights flickered and died. The jet began to plummet. Sarah screamed, clutching at her seat. This was it. This was how it all ended. Then, through the chaos, she heard a voice. A familiar voice. "Sarah!" the voice shouted. "Hang on! We're coming to get you!" It was Richard. The jet twisted, metal screaming, alarms blaring. Eleanor shrieked, clawing at Sarah. Ethan fought to stay upright, eyes wide with a fear Sarah hadn't seen before. Then, boom! The side of the jet ripped open. Icy wind howled. The city lights far below mocked their plummet. Richard, he was outside, hanging from a rope ladder lowered from a helicopter? He fought his way closer, wind whipping his hair, determination etched on his face. He reached the hole, extending a hand. "Sarah, grab on!" Eleanor shrieked, trying to pull Sarah back. "Don't listen to him. He's a traitor." But Sarah had made her choice. She kicked Eleanor away, grabbed Richard's hand. He hauled her out of the jet, into the roaring wind. Below, the jet exploded in a ball of fire. Gone. They dangled precariously, the helicopter pulling them away. Sarah looked back. No sign of Ethan. Weeks later, things were different. Richard, the real Richard, wasn't really her father. He was just Charles's friend, who adored her. But he was the only dad she would ever need. Margaret? In a good care home. Peace at last. And Eleanor? Vanished. The world thought she was dead. But Sarah knew better. One night, Sarah found a hidden file, a picture of herself as a baby. On the back, a single word, scrawled in Charles' handwriting. Aurora. Then she touched the computer and felt a surge of power. She heard voices. Then faces of her parents filled the screen. They had a message for her. "We have done everything we could to prepare you. Now it is your turn." What did it mean? What was Project Aurora really about? And where was Eleanor? Something was coming. Sarah could feel it. The world needed her. But was she ready? You think that's the end? Think again. This story is far from over. But to see what happens next, you need to take action right now. Subscribe immediately. Don't even hesitate, hit that red button now, or you'll miss out on the biggest twists yet. Smash that like button. This is the moment to show your support and help us feed the algorithm. Every like counts. Flood the comments. What do you think will happen next? Who's after Sarah? Let your theories run wild. Share this video right now. Send it to at least 5 friends who need to experience this insane finale. Don't wait. Do it now. Only the true fans understand the importance of supporting this channel. Don't let us down. The adventure continues if you're ready.